Thank you, Mr Speaker. First, let me add my voice to that of my colleagues Darian Fenton and Trevor Mallard in relation to the situation in Greymouth and with the Pike River miners, and say that our concern and our solidarity are with those workers, their families and their community. I stand speaking to what I consider to be one of the most disgraceful bills that I've seen come before this House in my time as a Member of Parliament. It's yet another piece of a concerted attack by this government on wage and salary earners in this country and on their unions. There's been quite a bit of rhetoric about choice, about flexibility, about somehow giving employers the absolute right to dismiss for any reason and without workers having any recourse is going to create jobs. This is just unbelievable, backward-looking, archaic attitude to work, and I intend in this speech to talk about what reasonable employment legislation and in fact positive employment legislation could mean in terms of the future of our workplaces. But let me start by talking about some of the particular aspects of this bill. Combined, they are unbalanced, they are unfair, they are unjustified and unnecessary. And this view has been reinforced by many submitters and by the officials that advise the government. But despite that, the Minister has decided to ignore that and to push on with this legislation. I'd start by saying the amendment is actually contrary to the bill it's amending, and I find that a very strange thing indeed. It seems to me that the provisions in this bill actually don't recognise what is a fundamental object of the Act, which is that there is an inherent inequality of power in employment relationships. That is a fundamental object in our Act. It's an Act that's designed to build productive employment relationships. I just do not see how the provisions of this bill create productive employment relationships, and I will come back to that point. Basically, work is about relationships. Generally, we work with others, and we work with others for a range of reasons. We go to work to earn money to live. We go to work so we can contribute our knowledge and our skills. We go to work so that we have social contact with others and so that we are part of our community and our society and the economy that then sustains us and our children. And we go to work and we expect that we will be treated with respect at work. And in all my years as a union official, money was always an issue for people. They didn't feel necessarily they were paid fairly, but the biggest one often was about respect, wanting to be treated with respect at work. So employment relations legislation exists to outline our rights at work, to give us a clear signal of what we as a society think are basic minimums, to guarantee those minimum standards, to say, look, it's not right to employ somebody for less than the minimum wage. We don't accept as a country it is right to do that. It is to establish processes and institutions with which to deal with employment relationship problems, and it's to provide security and certainty to employees and employers. So that's what our legislation should be about. And work has a very significant impact on our lives and on our families. We want to come home safely, feeling that we've been treated fairly at work. And, I remember my father saying to me, I can remember this from quite a young age, that the idea was you did a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, that was part of the kind of underlying fairness situation in this country, that we had the sort of country that was a basic tenet. We also, I think, have a view as New Zealanders that things improve, that we expect wages and conditions to improve, and our history will show that that's exactly what has happened over an extended period of time. That came to a rapid halt under the last National Government, where in fact we went backwards, where we actually reduced wages and conditions under the last National Government, and we're doing it again under this National Government. This goes against the notion that I think we should all share, that we want things to be better for our children and our grandchildren, better than what we experienced ourselves. And this legislation is being brought forward by a government that's supposedly ambitious for New Zealand, bringing a brighter future to New Zealand. Well, ain't going to bring a brighter future to our workplaces. This is bringing forth a whole lot of provisions that are most unfortunate, most unfair and certainly unbalanced. How do provisions like having 90 days at work where you have no rights, not even the right to know why you are dismissed if you are dismissed, and no right to challenge a dismissal if it's unfair, how can that be part of a successful, productive workplace? How can your right to access your union official if you have a grievance, if you're, as Trevor Mallard said, being sexually harassed, or if you feel there's a serious health and safety matter, as Darian Fenton outlined, how can it be right to actually have barriers put in the way of you having access to your union representative when you want them? And how can it be right to remove the right to reinstatement as a primary remedy to be argued for in situations of unjustified dismissal, the one remedy that takes you back to the situation you were in before you were unfairly dismissed? How can any of those things be things we should aspire to in the workplace of the future? They do not create the sort of positive, productive employment relationships that we are going to need as a country. The combined effect of these changes will mean that we have different labour markets for those who are skilled and unskilled, different labour markets for those who are new entrants to the workforce versus those who've been around a while, for those who are unionised and non-unionised. That will be really reinforced. And it will also mean that the effects will most strongly be felt on those already most vulnerable in the workplace, the most disadvantaged. It will make it more difficult to improve wages and conditions. It will lead to increased disputation and will continue the low productivity in our workplaces that is holding this country back, low productivity that is negative both for employers and employees. Overwhelmingly, people did not support these changes. There were nearly 8,000 submissions, and most of those submitters did not support these changes. 80% of New Zealanders, in response to a survey with a very straight question by the CTU, said no, it wasn't fair that people should be dismissed in the first 90 days of their employment. And even officials, Department of Labour officials, Treasury officials, questioned the value of this legislation and the evidence behind it. I want to talk about the kind of workplaces that we really do need to be looking at, because this is where a government that is ambitious or was ambitious or wanted a brighter future would be looking at. And that is workplaces that are more productive and innovative, where we actually value people more, where the wages are higher, where the workforce has more invested in their skills, and where, as a consequence, we get better outcomes. We get better outcomes that provide greater profitability to employers and sustain the higher wages and conditions that we all want. Those workplaces are going to need a really determined effort to encourage things like greater capital intensity, investment in skills, changing our people management, which is very poor. Evidence shows it to be very poor currently, and of course we're going to reinforce bad management behaviour by saying that the worst employers can behave abysmally and sack at will. We need to encourage innovation in our workplace processes and practices, and we need to have workforces that are well engaged, and that requires unions. Bottom line, that requires workers to have some sort of collective voice, some organisation that they can then participate and raise their concerns, raise their ideas, and actually negotiate with the employer. These unions that many on the other side are more than willing to vilify, to use negative stereotypes about, are actually key to changing the productivity and improving the productivity of our workplaces. We need more industry standards and we need more industry collaboration. But most of all, what we need to lift productivity at the workplace is productive employment relations. You cannot increase productivity by edict. You cannot say you will be more productive. You cannot lift productivity by cutting labour costs or by treating our workforce as commodities. You must invest in improving skills, improving wages and conditions, and giving workers a greater say, committing to having an independent voice for our workforce. So I say that this bill is not only unbalanced, unfair, unnecessary and unjustified, it will not lead to the type of productive changes that we need in New Zealand.